The great hall of Galactic Consul Station Omega-7 buzzed with nervous energy as beings from across the galaxy gathered for an emergency session. Ambassador Lee De-ho adjusted his simple black uniform and looked around the massive circular chamber. Floating platforms held representatives from dozens of species, each more alien than the last. Some had tentacles instead of arms, others had scales that shifted colors with their emotions, and a few looked like living crystals that hummed when they moved. Captain Park Min-soo stood beside Lee, his military posture unchanged despite the chaos around them. His weathered face showed no emotion as he watched the aliens argue in their strange languages. Dr. Kim So-ra sat nearby, her tablet ready to record everything. She found alien behavior fascinating, even when they were panicking. At the center of the chamber, Consul Prime Velthar floated in a bubble of shimmering light. The ethereal being had no solid form, just energy that shifted between blue and purple. When it spoke, its voice echoed in everyone's mind rather than through their ears. The sensation always made humans feel slightly dizzy. Fellow beings of the galaxy. Velthar's mental voice carried waves of fear and urgency. We face a crisis unlike any in recorded history. The void breach continues to expand, consuming entire star systems in its path. A holographic display materialized above the assembly, showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. A dark, spreading stain marked the outer rim, growing larger as they watched. Red dots indicated destroyed systems. Yellow ones showed systems under threat. The numbers were staggering. General Thaxmore, a massive reptilian creature with scales like black metal, rose from his platform. His species, the Zephyrians, had ruled their sector for 10,000 years through superior military might. When he spoke, his voice sounded like grinding stone. Honored Consul, my fleets have already attempted 3 separate assault missions. Each expedition was completely destroyed within hours of entering the anomaly. Dr. Kim leaned forward, genuinely curious. What exactly destroyed them? Thaxmore's yellow eyes fixed on her with surprise. Most species would never interrupt a military briefing, but humans seemed to ask questions about everything. Ancient defense constructs, Doctor. Massive geometric entities that phase in and out of reality itself. They appear to be automated, systems left behind by a civilization that died millions of years ago. Another being spoke up, this one resembling a giant insect with prismatic wings. The Cathara Collective sent our finest scientists to study the anomaly. They reported energy, readings that made no sense according to known physics. The constructs seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Lee nodded politely. How many expeditions have been sent so far? 17, Velthar replied, its mental voice heavy with grief. 7 from the Zephyrian Coalition, 4 from the Cathara Collective, 3 from the Silicon Confederacy, 2 from the Aquarian Depths, and 1 joint mission from the Crystal Communion. And the survival rate? Park asked in his flat military tone. 0, Thaxmore growled. Not a single ship returned, not even debris. They simply vanished from all sensors once they crossed the anomaly boundary. Dr. Kim pulled up data on her tablet. What was the longest any expedition survived inside the breach? A crystal being chimed like breaking glass. The Silicon Confederacy's advanced probe lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes before contact was lost. Their technology was specifically designed to survive in hostile dimensional spaces. Park raised an eyebrow. 4 hours? That's not very long. The chamber fell silent. Hundreds of alien eyes, sensors, and awareness fields focused on the 3 humans. Captain Park's casual observation seemed to confuse everyone present. Velthar's energy form flickered between colors rapidly. Captain Park, perhaps you do not understand the scale of this threat. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy have declared this mission impossible. Our combined scientific analysis gives any further expedition a 99.7% probability of complete failure. Lee stood up slowly, his movement drawing attention from every being in the chamber. Consul Prime, you called us here to request human participation in this mission, correct? That is accurate, Ambassador. Despite the unusual nature of your species, human technology and tactics have proven effective in certain situations. We hoped you might have insights that our logical approaches have missed. Dr. Kim smiled slightly. You mean because we're not logical? A wave of uncomfortable silence rippled through the chamber. Most galactic species prided themselves on logical thinking and rational decision-making. Calling someone illogical was considered insulting in most cultures. Thaxmore's scales shifted to a darker shade. Doctor, your species' tendency toward irrational behavior is well documented. While this trait has occasionally produced unexpected results, it hardly seems relevant to this crisis. Park crossed his arms. So let me get this straight. You've all decided this mission is impossible because your best attempts failed. Now you want us to try because we're too stupid to know it's impossible? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Several alien representatives began speaking at once, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of sounds, lights, and mental projections. Lee raised his hand for silence. Consul Prime, may we review the complete mission? Data, technical specifications, energy readings, tactical reports from previous expeditions? Of course, Ambassador. Though I should warn you, the data clearly indicates that any attempt to penetrate the anomaly results in immediate and total destruction. Dr. Kim was already accessing the files through her neural interface. Her eyes moved rapidly as she processed thousands of pages of technical data. After several minutes, she looked up with interest. This is fascinating. The constructs seem to respond to different types of approach with varying levels of aggression. Thaxmore leaned forward. Explain. Well, direct military assault triggered. The most violent response. Scientific exploration missions lasted slightly longer. Diplomatic approaches were ignored completely. She paused, thinking. Has anyone tried just talking to them? A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. The idea of communicating with automated defense systems struck most species as absurd, the crystal being chimed again. Doctor, these are ancient machines. They respond only to threat assessment protocols. Communication is irrelevant. Maybe, Dr. Kim shrugged. Or maybe they're just really bored after millions of years and want someone to chat with. Park turned to Lee. So what's our answer? Lee looked around the chamber, taking in the sea of alien faces filled with hope and desperation. These beings represented the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, and they were admitting defeat. They were asking humans to attempt what they considered impossible. Consul Prime, Lee said formally. The human delegation accepts this mission. The chamber erupted in a mixture of relief and disbelief. Some beings seemed grateful that someone was willing to try, while others appeared convinced they were watching a suicide pact. Velthar's energy form brightened. Ambassador, you understand the risks? The probability of survival is essentially zero. Lee nodded. We understand your assessment of the risks. And you accept them anyway? Park stepped forward. Consul Prime, with all due respect, this isn't even close to the most dangerous thing we've done this year. Dr. Kim giggled softly. Remember that thing with the quantum singularity and the angry space whales? Oh, right. Park grinned. This actually sounds kind of fun. The aliens stared at them in complete bewilderment. Their best scientists and warriors had declared the mission impossible, yet these three humans seemed to view it as entertainment. Thaxmore's voice carried a note of desperate confusion. How can you be so calm about facing certain death? Lee smiled politely. General, you called it impossible. We call it Tuesday. The silence that followed was profound. In that moment, every being in the chamber began to understand why humans had earned such a strange reputation across the galaxy, they didn't just refuse to accept impossible odds. They seemed genuinely excited by them. Velthar finally spoke, its mental voice carrying wonder and concern in equal measure. "Very well, Ambassador. How much time do you need to prepare for this impossible mission?" Lee looked at his companions, who both shrugged. 72 hours should be enough." The chamber erupted again. 72 hours to prepare for a mission that the galaxy's greatest minds couldn't solve in months of planning. The humans had just agreed to attempt the impossible with less preparation time than most species needed for a simple supply run. As the session ended and beings began to file out, many stole glances at the three humans who remained seated, calmly, discussing technical details as if they were planning a weekend trip rather than what everyone else considered an elaborate form of suicide. Dr. Kim looked up from her tablet. "So, should we pack sandwiches?" The human docking bay of Station Omega-7 hummed with activity as Commander Yoon Jae-min walked up the boarding ramp of his ship. The Indomitable looked nothing like the sleek vessels favored by other galactic species. Where alien ships curved and flowed like works of art, human ships looked like they were built from spare parts and determination. The Indomitable was a stealth frigate, painted matte black with random patches of different metals welded across its hull. Engineer Chief Cho Hyun-woo was already deep inside the ship's guts, surrounded by tools and components that shouldn't fit together, but somehow did. His coveralls were stained with oils from a dozen different worlds, and his toolkit contained items that would make alien engineers weep with confusion. When he worked, he hummed old songs from Earth and occasionally swore at particularly stubborn parts. "Captain, on deck," someone called out, though nobody bothered to stop working. Yoon grinned and stepped over a pile of cables that Cho had pulled from somewhere. "Status report, Chief." "Well, sir, the good news is that this bucket of bolts still flies. The bad news is that where we're going, normal flying might not be enough." Cho wiped grease from his hands and pulled up a holographic display of the ship's systems. "I've been reviewing the alien data about this anomaly thing." Lieutenant Han Yu-jin poked her head out from behind a control panel. She was the ship's pilot, famous throughout the human fleet for maneuvers that broke several laws of physics and at least 2 regulations about safe flying. Her flight suit was covered in patches from different ships and squadrons, each representing a mission that someone had called impossible. "The aliens are thinking about this all wrong," she said, emerging fully from her repairs. "They keep treating it like a military problem." Tech specialist Kong Mi-young looked up from her bank of computers and communication arrays. She was younger than the others, but her understanding of alien technology often surprised species that had been building computers for millennia. "I've been analyzing their tactical reports. Every expedition used the same basic approach: maximum shields, heavy armor, overwhelming firepower." Yoon sat down on a convenient ammunition crate. "And they all got destroyed in hours." "Exactly." Cho nodded enthusiastically. "So I'm thinking we do the opposite. Strip out the heavy armor, remove the big weapons, and see what happens when we show up looking harmless." An alien observer might have assumed this was a joke. Human military doctrine rarely involved making ships less dangerous. But the crew of the Indomitable had survived 3 impossible missions by doing exactly what logic said they shouldn't. Dr. Kim So-ra arrived carrying several containers of coffee and a tablet full of notes. "I brought caffeine and bad news." "Coffee first," Han said immediately. "Bad news can wait." After everyone had their coffee, Dr. Kim pulled up her analysis. "I've been studying the energy patterns from previous expeditions. The alien ships were destroyed in order of perceived threat level. The bigger and more dangerous they looked, the faster they got obliterated. Captain Park Min-soo joined them, having finished his meeting with the alien military commanders. The Zephyrians offered us their latest battleship, 2 kilometers of armor plating and enough firepower to crack a moon." "Perfect," Yoon said. We'll politely decline and take our little rust bucket instead." Park raised an eyebrow. "That's what I told them. General Thaxamore looked like I had just volunteered to fight a dragon with a water pistol. Cho was already pulling components from storage containers. Actually, Captain, that gives me an idea. What if we make the ship look even less threatening? Maybe add some decorations, play some music, act like tourists?" The idea was so absurd that it just might work. Han started laughing. "We could paint flowers on the hull." "Don't give him ideas," Kang warned, but she was smiling too. For the next 60 hours, the crew transformed their ship into something that would have horrified any military inspector. Cho removed the armor plating, revealing the ship's structural framework. He installed experimental engines that ran on principles most engineers considered theoretical. The weapons systems were replaced with communication arrays and scientific instruments. Meanwhile, Han reconfigured the flight controls for maximum maneuverability. If they couldn't fight their way through the anomaly, maybe they could dance their way through it. She programmed flight patterns that looked more like ballet than combat maneuvers. Kang worked on the ship's computer systems, preparing programs that could analyze and adapt to unknown technologies in real time. She also installed speakers throughout the ship because, as she explained, if they were going to die horribly, they might as well have good music playing. Dr. Kim studied biological samples from the outer rim, looking for any signs of life that might exist within the anomaly. What she found was fascinating. Microscopic organisms seemed to thrive in the high-energy environment around the breach. They were unlike anything in the known galaxy, and they appeared to be artificial. "These aren't natural organisms," she explained to the others. "Someone designed them. They're like tiny biological computers, processing information and passing it along to something bigger." Ambassador Lee arrived just as they were finishing the modifications. He looked at the transformed ship and nodded approvingly. "It certainly doesn't look like a warship anymore." "That's the point," Yoon replied. "We're not going to war. We're going to meet the neighbors." A delegation of alien observers had gathered to watch the human preparations. They stood in horrified fascination as Cho welded what appeared to be random junk to the ship's hull. The modifications violated every principle of starship design they knew. Consul Prime Velthar materialized near the group, its energy form flickering with confusion. "Ambassador Lee, are you certain your people understand the nature of this mission? They appear to be decorating their vessel." Lee watched as Han painted a cheerful yellow smiley face on the ship's nose. "They understand perfectly, Consul." Prime. General Thaxmore's scales had turned a worried shade of gray. "Ambassador, this is madness. Your ship now has the defensive capabilities of a pleasure yacht." "Actually," Cho called out from where he was installing speakers on the hull, "it has less defensive capability than most pleasure yachts. We removed the escape pods to make room for a better coffee machine." The aliens exchanged glances that somehow conveyed their shared certainty that they were watching an elaborate suicide ritual. Dr. Kim emerged from the ship carrying a small device. "I've been thinking about those microorganisms. What if the whole anomaly is actually a living system? The constructs might be immune responses, like white blood cells attacking an infection." Kang looked up from her computer work. "So, previous expeditions got destroyed because they triggered an allergic reaction? Maybe. If we can convince the system that we're not a threat, it might let us pass through safely." Han tested the ship's new maneuverability by performing a series of loops and spirals around the docking bay. The ship moved like a dancer, graceful and unpredictable. "I've programmed 17 different non-aggressive flight patterns. If the constructs want to chase us, we'll give them a show." The final modifications were completed in just over 60 hours. The Indomitable now looked like no military vessel in galactic history. It was covered in random decorations, equipped with communication gear instead of weapons, and designed for speed rather than combat. Commander Yoon gathered his crew for a final briefing. They sat in a circle on the cargo deck, drinking coffee, and eating sandwiches that Dr. Kim had insisted on packing. "All right, people, here's the plan," Yoon began. "We're going to fly into the most dangerous anomaly in the galaxy, make friends with ancient killer robots, and hopefully not die horribly in the process." "Sounds like Tuesday," Han replied cheerfully. "The alien observers predict we'll be destroyed within minutes of entering the anomaly," Park added. Cho grinned. "Good thing we're not alien observers." Kang pulled up a holographic display of the anomaly. "I've identified what might be communication frequencies used by the constructs. If we can establish contact, maybe we can avoid the whole death thing." Dr. Kim checked her scientific equipment one final time. "The biological samples suggest this isn't just a defense system, it's protecting something important." Yoon stood up and looked at his crew. They were about to attempt something that the galaxy's greatest minds had declared impossible. Their ship looked like a flying art project, their plan consisted mostly of improvisation, and their chances of survival were essentially zero according to every expert analysis. "Any questions?" he asked. Han raised her hand. "Should we put on some music for the trip?" "Absolutely," Yoon replied. "Any requests?" "Something upbeat," Cho suggested. "If we're going to make galactic history, we might as well have fun doing it." As the crew made final preparations for departure, the alien observers gathered to watch what they assumed would be the last time anyone saw the Indomitable. The ship looked absurd sitting next to the sleek alien vessels, like a child's toy among works of art. Ambassador Lee stood with the alien delegation as the ship powered up its engines. The sound was different from normal human ships, more musical somehow thanks to Cho's modifications. "Ambassador," Velthar asked, "how can your people be so calm about this mission?" Lee smiled as he watched his fellow humans prepare for the impossible. "Consul Prime." The Indomitable approached the edge of the anomaly with its speakers playing cheerful music and its hull decorated like a carnival ride. Commander Yoon sat in the captain's chair, drinking coffee and watching the space around them slowly change, from normal starfield to something that hurt to look at directly. "Entering the outer perimeter now," Lieutenant Han reported from the pilot's seat. Her hands danced across the controls as she guided the ship through space that seemed to bend and twist around them. "Reality is getting a bit wobbly out here." "Tech." Specialist Kang stared at her screens in fascination. "Energy readings are off the charts. Whatever powers this thing has access to more juice than most star systems." Engineer Chief Cho emerged from the engine room, wiping his hands on a rag. "The good news is, our modifications are working perfectly. The bad news is, I have no idea why they're working. By all known laws of physics, our engines should have exploded 10 minutes ago." Dr. Kim monitored her biological sensors while recording everything. "The microorganisms are getting more active as we go deeper. It's like they're excited about something." The ship crossed the official boundary of the anomaly, and immediately everything changed. The stars disappeared, replaced by swirling patterns of light that moved in impossible directions. Space itself seemed to have texture here, like swimming through thick liquid that sparkled. "Contact," Kang announced. "Something big is approaching from—" She paused, checking her instruments again. "Actually, I'm not sure where it's approaching from. Sensors say it's coming from above, below, and inside us all at the same time." Through the view screen, they saw their first construct. It was a massive, geometric shape that constantly shifted between being a cube, a sphere, and something with too many angles to count. Its surface was mirror-bright and reflected light that didn't exist anywhere else. "Well, hello there," Yoon said pleasantly, as if greeting a neighbor over the fence. "Nice weather we're having." The construct paused in its approach, hovering motionless for several seconds. Previous expeditions had opened fire at this point, triggering immediate retaliation. The Indomitable just sat there playing music and waiting. No response to verbal communication, Kang reported. But it's definitely scanning us. I'm getting data streams in languages that don't exist. Han carefully maneuvered the ship in a slow circle around the construct. It's beautiful. Look how the light moves across its surface. The construct began to move again, but instead of attacking, it seemed to be matching their movements. When Han turned left, it turned left. When she performed a gentle loop, it followed. Along. I think it's playing with us, Dr. Kim said with delight. It's copying our movements like a child learning to dance. Cho leaned over Kang's shoulder to look at the sensor readings. The energy signatures are changing. It's shifting into some kind of scan mode instead of combat mode. More constructs appeared around them, each one different from the last. Some looked like living crystals. Others resembled mechanical flowers that bloomed and closed in rhythm with unknown music. They all began following the Indomitable's movements, creating an impromptu space ballet. This is amazing, Han laughed as she guided the ship through increasingly complex maneuvers. They're not trying to destroy us. They're trying to understand us. Yoon activated the external communications array. This is Commander Yoon of the human vessel Indomitable. We're explorers from the Galactic Consul, here to investigate this anomaly. We'd like to talk to whoever is in charge. The response came not as words, but as images projected directly into their minds. They saw flashes of ancient civilizations, vast construction projects, and beings of pure thought working to build something magnificent. The images moved too fast to understand completely, but the emotion behind them was clear. Loneliness. They've been alone for millions of years, Doctor. Kim whispered. These constructs aren't just defense systems. They're the last survivors of whatever civilization built this place. Kang's screens erupted with data as the constructs began transmitting actively. I'm getting historical records, technical specifications, and what looks like poetry? This is incredible. They're downloading their entire culture into our computers. The ship suddenly lurched as space around them folded in ways that shouldn't be possible. When the sensation passed, they found themselves in a vast chamber that existed inside the anomaly. The walls were covered with symbols that shifted and changed as they watched, telling stories in languages that predated most galactic civilizations. Where are we? Cho asked, checking his instruments. According to sensors, we're simultaneously inside the anomaly, outside normal space, and somehow still in our original location. A new voice spoke to them, not through their communications, equipment, but directly into their minds. Unlike the chaotic images from before, this voice was clear and ancient and infinitely patient. Welcome, young builders. We have waited so long for someone to visit who came not to conquer but to understand. Yoon stood up from his chair. Are you the ones who built this place? We are what remains of the architects, the species you call the ancient builders. We created this sanctuary before our physical forms passed beyond the need for matter. We have maintained it through automated systems, hoping that someday another species would prove worthy of our knowledge. Dr. Kim could barely contain her excitement. The other expeditions failed because they approached this as a military problem. The previous visitors came with weapons and fear. Our defensive systems responded appropriately. But you came with curiosity and music. You treated our guardians as friends rather than enemies. This tells us much about your species. Han was still piloting the ship through the impossible space, following guidance from the constructs that had become their escorts. So this whole thing was a test? Not a test of strength or intellect, but a test of character. We needed to know if the next inheritors of our legacy would use our gifts wisely. The ship emerged into an even larger space, this one filled with structures that defied description. Buildings flowed like liquid while remaining solid, bridges connected places that had no physical relationship, and gardens grew plants made of crystallized thought. This is our greatest achievement, the architect voice explained. A sanctuary, where consciousness can exist independent of physical form, where thoughts become reality, and where the accumulated knowledge of our civilization is preserved for those who come after. Cho stared at the impossible architecture around them. How does any of this work? The same way your modifications work, young engineer. You built systems that should not function according to the laws of physics as you understand them, yet they operate perfectly because you believed they would. Kang looked up from her data streams. You're saying reality here is partially controlled by thought? Reality everywhere is partially controlled by thought. Most species never realize this because they limit themselves to what they believe is possible. Humans seem to have fewer such limitations. The ship came to rest on a platform that formed itself from crystallized space. As they prepared to disembark, the architect voice spoke again. You have passed the first test by arriving here safely, but greater challenges await. We must know if your species is ready for the responsibility that comes with our inheritance. What kind of responsibility? Yoon asked. The same responsibility we accepted long ago, to protect and guide younger species, to preserve knowledge and wisdom, and to ensure that the galaxy continues to grow and evolve rather than stagnate or destroy itself. Dr. Kim understood immediately. You want us to become the guardians of galactic civilization. We want to offer you that choice. The decision must be yours freely made, with full understanding of what it means. As the crew prepared to leave their ship and explore this impossible place, each of them felt the weight of the moment. They had come expecting to fight ancient machines or solve a puzzle. Instead, they had found the last remnants of a civilization so advanced that it had transcended physical existence, and those remnants were offering to share their greatest treasures. So what's the catch? Cho asked, because in his experience, deals that seemed too good to be true usually were. The catch, as you call it, is simple. If you accept our inheritance, you accept the responsibility to protect all life in the galaxy, even life that opposes you. You must become what we became. Shepherds of civilization, guardians of knowledge, and teachers of wisdom. Han powered down the ship's systems and stood up. And if we refuse, then you leave safely with our blessing and our gratitude for the brief end to our loneliness. The anomaly will remain, and perhaps another species will eventually find their way here. Yoon looked at his crew. They had volunteered for what everyone expected to be a suicide mission, and instead found themselves being offered godlike power and responsibility. It was exactly the kind of impossible situation that humans seem to attract. How long do we have to decide? As long as you need. Time moves differently here. You could spend years exploring and learning, and only moments would pass in the outside galaxy. The crew of the Indomitable stood at the threshold of the most important decision in human history. Behind them lay their small, decorated ship and the galaxy they knew. Ahead lay wonders beyond imagination and responsibilities beyond measure. Well, Yoon said finally, the crew of the Indomitable walked through corridors that seemed to exist in several dimensions at once. The walls showed scenes from across the galaxy. Alien worlds they recognized, civilizations they had never heard of, and places that might not even exist yet. Dr. Kim stopped every few steps to examine something impossible, while Engineer Chief Cho muttered under his breath about architecture that violated every rule of structural engineering. The architects were a lot like humans, the ancient voice explained as they moved deeper into the sanctuary. They valued creativity over logic, curiosity over caution, and cooperation over conquest. This is why we believe your species might be ready for our inheritance. Commander Yoon studied the images flowing across the walls. What happened to your physical forms? We evolved beyond the need for matter, about 3 million years ago. Our consciousness merged with the technology we created, allowing us to exist as pure thought and energy. But this advancement came with a price. We could no longer interact directly with the physical universe. Lieutenant Han paused at a window that looked out into space that didn't follow normal rules. Planets orbited around ideas instead of stars, and comets left trails of crystallized music. So you've been watching the galaxy develop, but couldn't interfere? Exactly. We could observe and preserve knowledge, but we could not guide or protect. This is why we created the Inheritance Protocol, to find a species capable of taking our place as guardians of galactic civilization. Tech Specialist. Kang was recording everything, her instruments struggling to process data that existed in formats that hadn't been invented yet. How many species have attempted this test? Over the past million years, 47 species have reached sufficient technological development to detect the anomaly. All failed the initial test because they approached with aggression or excessive caution. They entered a vast chamber where floating platforms held artifacts from civilizations across the galaxy. Some were familiar, others completely alien, and a few seemed to be made from materials that shouldn't exist. "This is our museum," the architect voice said with pride. "The collected knowledge and achievements of every species we've encountered. Their art, their science, their philosophy, all preserved here for future generations to learn from." Dr. Kim approached a display that showed the evolutionary history of a species that looked like living mathematics. "This is incredible. You've been documenting galactic civilization for millions of years. Someone had to. Too much knowledge has been lost to wars, natural disasters, and simple forgetfulness. We made ourselves the keepers of memory." Cho examined a machine that appeared to be building itself from blueprints made of light. "How do you expect us to maintain all this? We're just 5 humans with one slightly crazy spaceship." The inheritance includes the technology to create others like ourselves, beings who can exist in both physical and digital realms. But the choice to undergo that transformation would be voluntary, and the original personalities would remain intact. Yoon frowned. "You're talking about uploading consciousness?" "Not uploading. Expanding. You would retain your physical forms but gain the ability to exist in digital space as well. Think of it as adding new senses rather than replacing existing ones." They moved to another chamber where floating screens showed real-time images from across the galaxy. Alien fleets patrolled their borders. Scientists made discoveries in laboratories, and ordinary beings lived their daily lives unaware that they were being watched over by ancient guardians. "We have monitored threats to galactic civilization for millennia," the voice explained. "Rogue artificial intelligences, reality-destroying experiments, species that develop weapons capable of sterilizing entire sectors. When necessary, we intervened indirectly through our automated systems." Han pointed at one screen showing a massive space battle. "You've been stopping wars? We've been preventing extinctions. Wars between species are natural and often necessary for growth. But weapons that could destroy all life everywhere must be contained." Kang noticed something in the data streams around them. "These monitoring systems are showing current events. The Galactic Consul session where we accepted this mission, alien fleets positioning themselves around the anomaly, news reports about our expedition. We have been observing your mission with great interest. The alien species' reaction to your acceptance of this task tells us much about the current state of galactic politics." Dr. Kim studied biological samples preserved in crystalline matrices. "Some of these species went extinct millions of years ago, but you saved genetic samples?" "We saved everything we could. Knowledge, culture, art, genetic patterns, even the dreams and hopes of dying civilizations. Nothing is truly lost while we remember." They entered the central chamber of the sanctuary, a spherical space where streams of light carried information in patterns too complex for normal minds to follow. At the center floated a structure that looked like a crystalline flower made of pure thought. "This is the archive core," the architect voice said reverently. The accumulated knowledge of our civilization and everyone we've encountered. If you accept our inheritance, this becomes yours to maintain and expand. Yoon stared at the impossible beauty of the core. What exactly would we be inheriting? The technology, the responsibility, or both? Both are inseparable. The technology exists to fulfill the responsibility. Reality manipulation systems to protect threatened worlds, consciousness expansion matrices to preserve dying minds, dimensional engineering tools to build sanctuaries like this one. Cho approached one of the control interfaces, his engineers, instincts overriding his caution. How does it work? The same way your impossible modifications work, through will guided by understanding. You already demonstrate the fundamental principle by building things that shouldn't function but do. The interface responded to Cho's touch, showing him schematics for technologies that made faster-than-light travel look simple. Engines that ran on compressed time, shields that existed in parallel dimensions, weapons that could edit reality itself. "This is insane," he whispered. "With technology like this, humans could reshape the galaxy, which is precisely why the choice must be made carefully. Power without wisdom leads to tyranny. Wisdom without power leads to helplessness. We need guardians who possess both." Han was studying star maps that showed the galaxy's future development over the next 1,000,000 years. "You can predict what's going to happen?" "We can calculate probabilities based on current trends. Several potential extinction events appear likely unless someone intervenes. Climate disasters, resource wars, the awakening of ancient weapons, systems that we couldn't safely disable." Dr. Kim found herself looking at biological research that could cure diseases no one had discovered yet. This could save billions of lives. It could. But it could also disrupt natural evolutionary processes that lead to greater strength in the long term. Every intervention must be carefully considered. Kang discovered communication protocols that would allow instant contact with any technology, anywhere in the galaxy. You could coordinate the entire galactic community if you wanted to. We could, but we won't. Species must develop their own solutions to most problems. Guardians intervene only when the alternative is extinction or stagnation. Yoon felt the weight of what they were being offered. "You're asking us to become cosmic babysitters for the entire galaxy. We're asking you to become what we became, servants of life itself. The power we offer is vast, but it comes with absolute responsibility to use it wisely." The crew gathered in the center of the chamber, surrounded by more knowledge and power than human civilization had accumulated in its entire history. The decision they made here would affect not just their own species, but every form of life in the galaxy. "What happens if we accept and then change our minds?" Han asked. "The transformation can be reversed, but the knowledge cannot be forgotten. You would retain the understanding of what exists beyond normal perception, which some find difficult to bear." Cho looked at his companions. "So we could become godlike beings with the power to reshape reality. But we'd have to spend eternity, making sure everyone else plays nice." An oversimplification, but essentially accurate. Dr. Kim studied the genetic archives around them. "What about our families, our friends, our lives back home? Time moves differently here. You could serve as guardians for 1,000 years and return to find that only days had passed in normal space, or you could visit regularly, maintaining your connections to your original lives." Yoon realized this was the real test. Not their ability to reach the sanctuary or understand the technology, but their willingness to accept responsibility for something larger than themselves or their species. How long do we have to decide? As long as you need. But understand that, while you deliberate, threats continue to develop across the galaxy. Every day of delay means more potential for disaster. The 5 humans stood in the heart of a sanctuary built by beings who had transcended physical existence, offered power beyond imagination, and responsibility beyond measure. Outside, alien fleets waited nervously for their return, unaware that the fate of galactic civilization rested in the hands of 5 people who had volunteered for what everyone thought was a suicide mission. "I think," Yoon said slowly, "we need to talk this over." The crew of the Indomitable sat in a circle on the crystalline floor of the archive core, drinking coffee that Engineer Chief Cho had somehow managed to brew using energy patterns instead of heat. The impossibility of their situation had become so normal that making coffee from pure thought seemed perfectly reasonable. "All right," Commander Yoon said, setting down his cup. "Let's think about this logically." Lieutenant Han snorted. "Since when do we do anything logically?" "Fair point. Let's think about this the way humans always think about impossible decisions." Dr. Kim pulled up holographic displays showing the current state of galactic civilization. Wars brewing between species, environmental disasters threatening entire worlds, ancient weapons awakening from million-year slumbers. The galaxy is heading for serious trouble. The architects have been preventing the worst disasters, but they can't keep doing it forever. Tech specialist Kang accessed data streams showing the political situation back at Consul Station Omega-7. "The alien species are already planning memorial services for us. They're convinced we've been dead for hours," Cho laughed. "They have no idea we're sitting in the middle of the universe's greatest library being offered the keys to godhood." "That's the thing, though," Yoon said seriously. "It's not godhood. They're offering. It's a job. The worst job in the galaxy, actually. Infinite responsibility, constant crises, and everyone expecting you to fix everything while staying invisible." The architect voice spoke softly in their minds. "We understand your hesitation. The burden we carried was not light. But consider the alternative. Watching civilizations destroy themselves when you had the power to help but chose not to use it." Han studied the star maps around them. "How many extinction events have you prevented? Over the past 1,000,000 years, we have intervened to prevent 47 species extinctions, 16 galactic-scale wars, 3 reality-threatening experiments, and countless smaller disasters." "And without guardians?" Dr. Kim asked. "Conservative. Estimates suggest that 90% of current galactic civilization would not exist." Cho examined the technology interfaces again. "The power levels here are insane. We could literally move stars, create new worlds, resurrect dead species. With great power comes the great temptation to use it unwisely," the architect warned. "This is why we chose beings like yourselves, species that value cooperation over domination." Kang looked up from her data analysis. "What about human expansion? Our colonies, our exploration programs, our own development as a species? Nothing would change. Guardians operate behind the scenes, preventing disasters rather than directing development. Your species would continue to grow and evolve naturally." Yoon stood up and walked to the edge of the chamber, looking out at the impossible architecture of the sanctuary. "You know what the real problem is? This is exactly the kind of responsibility humans can't refuse. You're asking us to be cosmic, firefighters, and we've never met a fire we wouldn't run toward. Is that a bad thing?" Han asked. "Not bad, just inevitable." He turned back to his crew. "Let's be honest about what we're dealing with here. 5 humans who volunteered for a suicide mission because it sounded interesting. We've spent our entire careers doing things other people said were impossible. Now we're being offered the chance to do it on a galactic scale." Dr. Kim nodded slowly. "The real question isn't whether we can handle the responsibility. It's whether we can handle not taking it." "Exactly. How could we go back to normal life knowing that ancient weapons are waking up and we had the power to stop them but chose not to?" Cho grinned. "Plus, this technology is amazing. I could build ships that run on imagination and bridges that connect yesterday to next Thursday." Kang was already planning modification to the Indomitable. We could upgrade our communication systems to talk to every AI in the galaxy simultaneously. The diplomatic possibilities alone are staggering, Dr. Kim added. We could establish real communication between species that have been enemies for millennia. Han looked at the navigation systems that could travel through dimensions she couldn't even name. And the places we could explore. Parallel universes, pocket dimensions, the spaces between thoughts. Yoon listened to his crew and realized the decision had already been made. They were humans, after all, and humans had never been able to resist an interesting challenge, no matter how dangerous or impossible it seemed. Architect, he said formally, we accept your inheritance. The silence that followed lasted exactly 30 seconds before Cho started laughing. That's it? The most important decision in galactic history, and we make it in less time than it takes to order lunch? Did you expect us to take longer? Han asked. I expected at least an hour of philosophical debate about the nature of power and responsibility. Doctor, Kim was already examining the biological archives with new purpose. We can start with the immediate threats. That rogue AI developing in the Cygnus sector, the dimensional instability near the galactic core, the planet-killer asteroid heading for the Zephyrian homeworld. Wait, Yoon said. There's a planet-killer asteroid heading for the Zephyrian homeworld? The architect voice carried amusement. It will arrive in approximately 6 months. We had planned to deflect it through gravitational manipulation. Kang checked the calculations. General Thaxmore doesn't know about this. The asteroid exists in a parallel dimension that phases into normal space only during specific cosmic alignments. Their science cannot detect it yet. So our first official act as galactic guardians is saving the people who thought we were idiots for taking this mission, Han said with satisfaction. Seems appropriate, Yoon agreed. The transformation began immediately. Instead of the painful process they had expected, it felt like gaining new senses. They could suddenly perceive digital dimensions alongside physical ones, sense the flow of information across galactic networks, and feel the presence of consciousness wherever it existed. Cho found himself understanding technologies that had seemed impossible minutes before. I can see how everything connects. The quantum foundations, the dimensional interfaces, the consciousness integration protocols. It's all just engineering on a bigger scale. Dr. Kim felt her awareness expand to include every form of life in the galaxy. There are so many different types of consciousness. Some species think in colors, others in mathematical equations, and a few exist as pure emotion. Kang merged with communication networks spanning thousands of worlds. I can access any computer system in the galaxy. The amount of information flowing through these networks is incredible. Han discovered she could navigate through spaces that existed only in theory. Time, dimension, thought, possibility, they're all just different types of distance to travel through. Yoon felt the weight of responsibility settle around him like a comfortable coat. I can sense the threats developing across the galaxy. The patterns of cause and effect, the probability cascades that lead to extinction events. How do you feel? The architect asked. Like we just got promoted to the most important job in the universe, Yoon replied. And like we're probably going to enjoy it way more than we should. The Indomitable began to transform as well, its systems integrating with architect technology. The decorations Cho had added became functional components of a reality manipulation matrix. The speakers Han had installed could now broadcast across dimensional barriers. The coffee machine somehow became a quantum processor capable of calculating the trajectory of thoughts. Time to return to the outside galaxy, the architect said. Your transformation is complete, but your education has only begun. As they prepared to leave the sanctuary, the archive core opened to reveal a small, crystalline device. A communication relay, the architect explained, should you need guidance or wish to consult our accumulated wisdom. The crew boarded their transformed ship, now barely recognizable as the vessel they had arrived in. It looked like a work of art that could rewrite the laws of physics, which was essentially what it had become. "Ready for the return trip?" Han asked, her hands resting on controls that responded to thought as much as touch. "Ready," Yoon confirmed. "Let's go show the galaxy that the impossible mission was just the beginning." As the Indomitable emerged from the anomaly, every sensor on every alien ship focused on the impossible side of a human vessel returning from certain destruction. The ship that had entered as a decorated frigate emerged as something that hurt to look at directly, its hull shifting between dimensions and trailing streams of crystallized possibility. Ambassador Lee's voice crackled across communication channels. "This is Commander Yoon reporting mission success. We've made contact with the entities responsible for the anomaly and reached a mutual understanding." The understatement of the century, delivered with typical human casualness. "What is your status?" Consul Prime Velthar asked, its mental voice shaking with disbelief. "Status is operational. We've accepted a consulting position with the previous management and will be implementing some policy changes regarding galactic security." In the months that followed, impossible things began happening across the galaxy. Ancient weapons mysteriously malfunctioned before they could be activated. Dying stars stabilized without explanation. Conflicts between species ended when key figures suddenly developed unexpected wisdom about compromise. When asked about these miraculous events,